Hello, judicious coders. My name is Shawn, and I will be your instructor today. You're watching Lesson 2 of the Java for Beginners series. Now, before I say anything else, to those of you watching this video around the publication date, Happy New Year! It's 2022 now, and I hope all of you are having a great New Year so far, and hopefully you've set some nice resolutions that'll take you through the year. In any case, Happy New Year, and let's get into the video. So, like I said, this is Lesson 2 of the Java for Beginners series. So if you haven't seen Lesson 1, go ahead and do that now. It's linked in the description below, or you can go ahead and go to my channel page and find it there. So in today's lesson, we're going to actually get started with programming in Java. We're going to install what we call an IDE, or Integrated Development Environment. So what an integrated development environment is basically a place where we can write and compile our code. So we're going to do that in a second, and then after that we'll also write your first Java program, and I'll give you a step-by-step analysis of what everything is, and you're going to go ahead and get started in your Java journey today. So to go ahead and get started with installing your IDE for Java, which is where we're going to write our code, go ahead and open a browser. So let's go ahead and open Microsoft Edge here. Go to Google or your preferred search engine. And now, before we actually install the IDE that I like, I'm going to go ahead and show you just how many IDEs there are. So you don't have to do this, but I'm going to type Java IDEs. And just look at this. There are so many different open source and non-open source IDEs that you can use to write Java code. I mean, look at all of these. So out of all of these, really, everyone is going to have their own preference on which IDE they want to use and which one they like the most. But the one that I like the most is something called IntelliJ IDEA by a company called JetBrains. So to get to IntelliJ IDEA, just go ahead and type IntelliJ IDEA like this in Google, and then go ahead and click the first one. So the one that says JetBrains IDEA, this one, go ahead and click on that. Started installing it. Once you click on it, you'll see this download button pop up here. So once you're on the page, go ahead and click this download button. If this doesn't show up, then you can also click this download button up here. Okay, so you could be using Mac OS, Linux, or Windows for this. So it should already highlight your operating system. If it doesn't, though, go ahead and click on it. So for Windows users, now, okay, so we're going to install the Community Edition because that's the free one, and it still has most of the features, including all the ones that we need. So if you're on Windows, go ahead and click Download on the Community one right here. For Mac OS, it's right here, and for Linux, it's right here. So I'm on Windows right now, so I'm going to go ahead and click on the Community exe. Okay, and it's going to go ahead and get started and downloading. So if you have a slower internet connection, it's a fairly large file, so it might take some time, but it won't take a horrible amount of time, even if you're not on a super fast connection. So we'll just give it a second here to download. Okay, so it's downloaded now. If it hasn't downloaded yet for you, go ahead and just pause the video and wait for it to install. But you could either click here, or if you're on Windows, you can go into your File Explorer, Downloads, and it should be right here. So double click on this, and even if you're not on Windows, the setup will be pretty similar. It's going to ask for administrator permission. Okay, moving on. Oh, by the way, you don't need administrator permission. You can still install without it. So if you're on a computer where you don't have administrator permission, don't worry, you can still install it. So moving on, it says a couple of things here, and I'll just go ahead and click next. If you want to change this, if you know what you're doing and you want to change this, go ahead, but we're just going to leave it as is here. Okay. So here, you don't need to do anything. I'm going to go ahead and click on Create a Desktop Shortcut. That way, when we're on our desktop, we'll have a little icon that we can click on and it'll automatically open. But there's nothing that you have to click here. Alright, moving on. Alright, just click Install after this. Okay. Now, the amount of time that this will take to install is completely dependent on how fast or slow your computer is. But it shouldn't take a horribly large amount. It should be pretty reasonable in how long it takes, even if you're on a slower computer. So we're just going to go ahead and give it another couple of, maybe a minute or two to install here. Now I went ahead and sped mine up here, but yours will probably take a little while longer. So go ahead and pause the video for a moment. Alright, so it has installed. And if yours hasn't installed, like earlier, go ahead and pause the video and wait for that to happen. But, so what we're going to do is go ahead and click Run IntelliJ IDEA Community Edition here, and then click Finish. Okay, so at this point, IntelliJ IDEA has installed on your computer, and it's all set. So really, at this point, all we're going to do is get our program ready. So we have our IDE installed. Now we're going to go ahead and get our program set. So go ahead and accept the user agreement. Data sharing, it really doesn't matter. I'll just go ahead and click Send Anonymous Statistics, but you don't have to. Okay. After that, you're going to see a page like this, or at least something around, like something similar to this. So you're not going to be able to open anything because we haven't made a project yet. So go ahead and click on New Project right here, this plus button. Okay. So now one of the things that I really like about IntelliJ IDEA is that normally you would have to install something called the JDK, which we talked about in the first lesson a little bit. But with IntelliJ IDEA, it handles that for you, and we don't actually end up having to install JDK. It does that for us. So where you see Project SDK, it says no SDK. Go ahead and click on this button that says Download JDK. Alright, version, just make sure it's the most updated version. I'm going to go 17 because that's the best that there is right now. Make sure that it also is on Oracle Open JDK. Don't worry about the location, and then go ahead and just click download. Alright, it shouldn't take too long for this to download. And Oracle Open JDK is one of the more popular JDKs available. A lot of companies have their own, but the one that most people use is Oracle's Open JDK. So it has downloaded here, and we're going to go ahead, don't worry about any of this, just go ahead and click next. Okay, click Create Project from Template, and you should see command line up there. So go ahead and click Next after that. Alright, so project name. Now, we're going to go ahead and call this First Java Program, and we're going to do this in camel case. So camel case is basically where the first letter of every word is capitalized, except the first. So look at this. First Java Program. So go ahead and write it like that. And once you have, go ahead and click Finish. And by the way, this base package should say com.company. So as long as that does, go ahead and click Finish. Awesome. So once that's all done, you should come to a page that looks something like this. And it should say main.java. That's where you want to be. So there are a couple of things that we want to do. Now, I'm going to first go ahead and just write our program, and you follow along. Go ahead and write the program with me. Don't worry about what everything is. I promise that I'll show everything to you and explain everything step by step right after we actually finish writing it. So above public class main, go ahead and put 2 slashes and write this program displays hello world. Just like that. Okay. Now, inside of public class main, you should see public static void main string array of args. Again, I'll explain all of that in a second. But below that, where it says write your code here, go ahead and erase that. And instead put... Oh, and make sure... Actually, go ahead and erase this line completely. Go back up one and click enter. That'll indent it for you. And then type, and make sure you're writing this in the exact same way that I am, including the case. So system.out.println and parentheses, quotation marks, and hello world. And then after that, put a semicolon. Okay, now this is where the magic happens. Go ahead and come over here and click Run Main. Now, because this is our first program, it might take a little bit of time for it to run, but you should see this after that, and it'll display Hello World. Congratulations! You wrote your first Java program. So now, let's go ahead and go through this and explain what everything is. So, the first line is package.com.company. This is something that's pretty particular to IntelliJ IDEA. It's not something that you'll have in every IDE or place where you write it. So this is actually something that you can pretty much ignore, and it's not something you'll need most of the time. So our real program is from line 2 to line 8. So let's see, line 2 is something that we call a comment. So a comment in Java is signified by these 2 slashes. The 2 slashes signify a single line comment that documents the code. Our Java compiler completely ignores everything after 2 slashes to the end of the line. Comments, again, do not impact the actual code, but they provide information to humans outside the syntax. So again, comments are 100% for humans to make it a bit more readable, but it has nothing to do with the actual compiler. The compiler doesn't care about it. Now, another thing that I want to talk about is something called case sensitivity. Java is a case-sensitive language. Case sensitivity means that syntax, which is basically the words that the computer understands, so in this program, like some examples of syntax would be public, class, like they don't mean much to us necessarily, but the computer, it's everything. Now, so for example, the Java command for outputting text to the screen is this, system.out.println. So if you were to type something else, like if we made the S lowercase, or if we made the O uppercase in out, and we tried to run this, so give it a second, look at this. The package system does not exist. So it will not work if you try to mess around with the cases, because Java is a case-sensitive language, which means that it does care about whether things are uppercase or lowercase. And if you change the case, then Java will not understand. So what we put here with our lowercase s in system and our uppercase O and out, that means that Java is not understanding exactly what we put here, which is why we have an error. Alright, moving on. We talked about comments and our case sensitivity. Let's go ahead and fix this. It's a capital S and a lowercase o. Okay, so now we're going to talk about something called classes. So a class is this. This is where we're defining our class. So public class main. So our class here is called main. That's the class of the file. All Java programs are made of at least one class. The class name must match the file. So our file here is main.java, so we have public class main. We capitalize every word in Java, which we call Pascal case. Now, another thing that we use is something called camel case, where every word is capitalized except for the first, which is how we named our program here, first Java program. All the words are capital except for the first one. Okay, the curly braces, so this here and this here, mark the scope of the class. Everything inside of the curly braces is part of our class main. Okay, now let's talk about methods. So methods is what we're seeing here. Every Java program must have a method called main. So main is right here. A method is a sequence of tasks for the computer to execute, and this main method holds all of the instructions for our program. Okay, moving on. Let's talk about something called statements. So our statement is this line right here. The code uses the method println to send the text hello world to the terminal as output. Println comes from an object called out, which is this here, which is responsible for the various types of output. Objects are packages of state and behavior, and they are often modeled on real-world things. Out is located within system, which is another object responsible for representing our computer within the program. We can access parts of an object with a period or a dot, which is known as dot notation. This line of code is a statement, line 6, because it performs a single task. Statements always conclude with a semicolon, which is why we have to add the semicolon here. Not all programming languages require a semicolon at the end of statements, but Java is a programming language that does. Okay, last thing is something that the compiler ignores, but it's very important for us, called whitespace. Java programs allow good use of whitespace, like tabs, spaces, and new lines, to create code that is easier to read. And I'm going to go ahead and show you. So whitespace is really anything that is not code. So for example, this line, line 4, is completely empty. That is whitespace. If we put, so this right here is whitespace. This is white. Now, it's also technically an indent, but really anything that, like for example, line 4, we don't need this to be empty. If we put removed line 4 like that, and we put this here, that still completely works. Like Java will still recognize this exactly as it did when line 4 was empty. But whitespace is really, really important for humans. We use it to indent and separate lines of code. Whitespace really does increase the readability of your code for both yourself and others. Alright, and now I know we talked about a lot today, so let's go ahead and review. So we started by creating our program. We talked about how Java is case sensitive, which means that what's uppercase must be uppercase and what's lowercase must be lowercase, otherwise the compiler will not understand. We then talked about comments. Comments are things like this, where you have 2 slashes, and everything after that is something purely for humans to be able to understand what's going on. We then talked about classes. All Java programs need at least one class, and the class must match the name of the file. The curly braces mark the scope of the class, and everything inside them is part of the class. We then talked about methods. Every single Java program must have a method called main. A method is basically a sequence of tasks for our computer to execute, and it holds all the instructions for the program. Then we talked about statements. So this particular example uses println to send hello world as our output. Now, objects are packages of state for behavior, and they're often modeled on real-world things, such as the object called out, which literally is for output. Now, out is within system, and that's another object which is responsible for representing our computer. We access parts of an object with a dot, like we have used here, like we've used right here and right here, which is known as dot notation. We know that this line is a statement because it performs a single task, which is to print hello world. And statements always conclude with a semicolon. Lastly, we talked about whitespace. Whitespace is really any space where there's not code that we use solely for us to increase our readability of code. So for example, we had whitespace in line 4 earlier. We use them to indent and separate lines of code. And really, the structure of Java programs will feel a lot more familiar once you work with the language. Go ahead and keep on watching this series, and you'll be a pro at Java in no time. And with that, we pull to a close. Thank you so much for watching. Again, I want to wish those watching around the new year a very happy new year. I really hope that this lesson was helpful. If it was, please do consider liking and subscribing. It really does mean a lot to me. And I really do hope to see you in Java's lesson 3 or any other video. Thank you very much for watching once again, and I hope to see you very soon.